Hey Andy,
How you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Would you tell me if you weren't?
Haha, that's what my new book's all about. Yeah, well, not necessarily. We've got to get to know each other better first.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was watching one of your videos on a networking stage. I think you were on, and you were discussing this topic,
Yeah,
and you said, what if you went to an event where you were asked this continuously? I think
yeah,
it's the main video on your YouTube page actually. So
yeah,
what if you're asked this on a continuous basis? What would you say?
yeah,
And I just thought it'd be a really interesting way to begin this.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, you caught me. You
Someone said
caught
I'm diving straight in, but
But what I do say in the book is you don't have to answer honestly to everyone. It is just an icebreaker, but it's about being honest with people that you trust.
yeah, fair.
So that's the key thing. So yeah, but it's a reflex response, isn't it? I'm good. I'm okay. I'm fine.
It's like we have a program response for each day, right? Whenever
Yeah.
we do, we have something like this.
Yeah.
So how's the book going? It's
Um,
2 months. Well, we're recording 22nd October. It's 10th of December. It's coming out.
yeah. Yeah. 10th December. So I um, have the final proof that I'm going through at the moment. So when we finish this call, I go back and start reading the second half of the book for the umpteenth time. And I'm just picking up a few things that still need changing. I still will. In a year's time, I'll find something that I missed. That goes back to the publisher today or tomorrow. And then it's just getting it into print. And I've got to send it off to the other publishers for the audio book and start getting the word out that it's coming. So it's
Amazing.
exciting now. You're getting to the stage where it's partly, thank God it's coming out, and partly, oh my God, where have I got the time? I've got to start marketing this damn thing. And I'm already marketing the podcast and connected leadership. And how do I fit it into the schedule? But it's a nice problem to have.
Brilliant. What number book is this?
5,
How have you found it compared to the previous four?
harder, much harder.
Okay.
Uh, because it's not, the other 4 are basically me brain dumping,
Yeah.
just dumping on the page stuff I know. Connected leadership I wrote in 2 weeks. I was just like, bang, bang, bang. This has taken 3 years. This has been about 50 interviews and 4 different manuscripts in which, the final one and the first one unrecognizable, completely different format. Stories have been dumped, interviews have been just totally cut out, cut down. Different parts of the book, they've been moved around, and it's been a hard slog. And actually, even when I read it now, you can feel some chapters flow better than others.
Mm.
If you're reading it again now, you think, I could still run this past an editor, to another time. But at some point, you just got to put it out there.
Yeah. That's Yeah, I would be curious to know how it feels to write. I'm sure I will at some point write a book where you don't feel like it's top of the tongue, tip of the tongue. Like I remember
Yeah,
with my
yeah,
book, the first draft, I think I pumped it out in about 3 weeks,
yeah,
and I thought
yeah.
this is easy. And then I obviously got to editing, and it's a whole different ballgame. But I can only
Yeah, but
imagine. Yeah,
yeah, if you're talking about your story, your take on things, what you know about, it's like if you say to me or I say to you, tell me about your experience writing the book. You can tell me.
mm,
But if I say to you, tell me about Sitao's experience running a business, you got to go off and interview Sitao, get that story, find the best bits, work out how it fits the thread of the argument you're sharing. How does it fit with another story that's going in the same theme? And there's a lot of crossover between interviews, and how do you do it? How do you fit them together? It's a totally different ball game. I wouldn't rush to do it like this again.
mm.
I'll see what the response is like. I think it's a deeper and more um, you, I think it's a deeper book. I wouldn't say more considered because I think the advice and the ideas in the other books are still strong, but there's a depth to it because it's not just me that the other books might lack. A gravitas to it as well, maybe. But I think equally it does affect the flow of the storytelling a little bit of the narrative.
How do you feel like your writing's evolved over the years with the book writing?
I would have to look back at the other books. I think thinking back, I mean, the first book was just a mess because there were 3 of us and we didn't know what we were doing. So it needed a good editor to bring it together. I think that it's not just so much the writing, it's the content has become deeper as I've become more and more ingrained in what I do. You know, you're pretty looking at 15 years between first book and fifth. So you'd hope that my ideas have evolved, and the depth I go to and the strategic thinking behind them have evolved a lot since then. And I remember my girlfriend back, when was I seeing her? Don't know, maybe 12 years ago. She worked for a speakers bureau, and she kept picking me up on my stuff was too simple. And I think that's been overcome now, you know, to appeal to corporates and so on. Corporates are my clients now, you know, and I'm getting good responses. So I think it's evolved in that sense.
With the book Just Ask that you're publishing in December, what was the spark to write this book and take a completely different trajectory to the other ones, which were more networking focused and connection focused?
The spark was a couple of things. So the first thing that happened was my business was struggling. I went to a professional speaking association meeting in Reading, and someone I knew, Stephen Houghton Burnett, was running a workshop. And as part of that workshop, he had a questionnaire, and we just sat and wrote our answers in. And one of the questions, actually, there were two questions the same, one around your speaking business and the other around non-speaking business. And the speaking business, well, both questions were the same. They said, how would you describe your business at the moment? And there were four options in, I think, growing, stable, a new business, and in decline. And you answered all the questions. And then he went around the room going through every question. And what did you put? And when he got to those questions, he asked people to put their hands up for what they ticked. And no one put their hand up for in decline, including me. And my business was in decline. And it made me realize I was going to these meetings, my business was struggling in a community where we're very close and supportive. And people were asking, how's business? And I was saying, yeah, it's fine. It's good. And I was lying. And I thought, if I'm doing that, what about everyone else? So I set myself a goal to turn my business around. And then when I had done it, with the help of other people, when I'd done it, turn up at the annual convention, get a main stage slot and tell everyone to start opening up. And so that was the first prompt, and I did that. And in the meantime, about 6 months before that convention, someone I knew committed suicide. And at their memorial service, which I attended, everyone was saying what a wonderful, generous person they were and how he was always looking out for other people. And it turned out he had financial problems and no one knew. And so there was this whole thing about he was all about other people, but never for himself, never looking for support for himself. And, you know, you ask anyone in that room if they would rather have him ask for help and them support him than that happened, then of course they'd have all said yes. So that added a drive to it. I delivered the talk at the convention, and then so many people came up to me. And I teach, traditionally I've taught networking, I teach professional relationships, I teach people how to get referrals. People don't cry at my talks unless they're excruciatingly bad. So hopefully people weren't crying at my talks. People were coming up and saying they were in tears. And one person emailed everyone in his region saying after Andy's talk, I need to share this with you. And a few people did similar things, and it got back to me. And that's when I realized, well, actually, you know, the goal had been to tell my tribe, my community, we got to change how we interact with each other. But there's a book here. This is something I want to pursue further. And because I didn't consider myself an expert on it, the best way to become an expert on some things is to have to write a book on it, because then you've got to become an expert. And 50 interviews and everything else later, then, you know, I think maybe I qualify.
What kind of interviews were you having with people? Who were you seeking out?
Yeah, two types. One was people with stories to share, which illustrate the power of vulnerability or the damage of not being vulnerable. And they were a mix of, some were celebrities. So you got a former world boxing champion. You got a former backing singer to Tom Petty and Leonard Cohen. People like that. And then someone said, what about getting someone from American gangs? So I got someone who was a gang member in the Bronx to get, you know, that toughness, that looking good story. And then people started coming forward with their stories, and amongst them as well, there were people who aren't celebrities but have a really powerful stories. A good friend of mine, and well, there were two that friends of mine I always knew I wanted in. Both had gone through similar experiences with miscarriage. One of them had experienced several failed IVF as well as stillbirth and miscarriage, and I was with her when twins were stillborn, and it was the most traumatic day of my life, let alone hers. She'd phoned me one day, and she was in tears, and she spoke out a lot about, the trauma and the journey, the IVF journey. She blogged about it, and she was due to appear on the local BBC radio station the next day, and her business partner didn't want her to. And so I interviewed both of them to get the different perspectives, one who shares very openly and one who doesn't share. And it turned out, I didn't know, Paul had been through that with his wife as well, and he was very closed about it. So get those different perspectives. And then there was another friend who shares very openly, and she went through a very traumatic time, nearly died from sepsis. And she was posting pictures. Her profile picture on Facebook was her in a hospital bed looking white as a sheet. And at the time I felt she overshared, so I wanted to understand it better. So there's a mixture of stories like that. And then the other side of the coin are experts in different areas. So I've got chapters on vulnerability within the corporate environment, leadership stories, how do you be a vulnerable leader, cultural differences. So I interview people all over the world on different cultures and how different cultures approach vulnerability and honesty. In relationships, we look at face in China, for example, the principle of saving face and how that fits in. We look at the Russian macho approach and so on. I interviewed my niece, who's in fact next week she turns 22. Got to get this right, I keep getting it wrong. I asked my sister last week, the other day, if it was her 21st. She went, that was last year. But I wanted to get I wanted to get the generational differences, and I thought, well, interview someone from a younger generation she was doing a university project at the time on is her generation the loneliest generation ever? So we could tap into that. We look at gender differences. We look at, I think one of the most interesting chapters for me, and I think it's a chapter that, from the feedback I've had, people either love or loathe, it depends on your interest. I've long had a belief that Margaret Thatcher's famous saying, "You turn if you want to, the lady's not for turning," has been very damaging for UK politics. And it's created a culture where we don't allow our politicians to be vulnerable, and they're not allowed to make mistakes. And you see this every day, particularly now. And so I interviewed James Cleverly, who was chairman of the Conservative Party, and Joe Swinson, the former leader of the Lib Dems, about vulnerability in politics as well. So there's a whole range of different interviews and different perspectives on it.
What was the most surprising thing to learn in your journey here?
What was the most surprising thing to learn? That's a good question. I think early on in the journey, I learned that I wasn't as vulnerable and as open and as transparent as I thought I was, as I gave myself credit for. So I think very early on, I recognized that. I thought I was one of the most open people I knew, but I realized I'm actually very closed. Just a lot of people are. I think the other thing that was really interesting is I made assumptions about gender differences in vulnerability that aren't necessarily there. So I think we have this image that it's much easier for women to be open and vulnerable than for men. I think that's true in certain environments, but it is very environment specific and culture specific as well. But it's not as black and white as we might imagine. So I think that was an interesting finding as well.
Can you elaborate on that, the gender difference? Because there's obviously that assumption that men are struggling the most with this.
Yeah.
But it sounds like your research has proved potentially otherwise. What's the environmental impact here?
I think we've become more aware of men's struggles with opening up and mental health. There is more support available for men than there's ever been. You know, I interview Luke Dowling, who was a professional rugby player who retired at 28. His brother had committed suicide. Luke Ambler. Luke Ambler, he was an Ireland international rugby league player, and he retired at 28, good career, but he threw himself into something called Andy's Man Club. Nothing to do with me, but his brother was called Andy, and it's in tribute to him, where he creates an environment for men to open up, and that's happening more and more. So those environments are opening up. There are cultures where it is much harder for a man. You know, interviewed a couple of Indian women, and they were saying, you know, very patriarchal society where the man has to be strong, and actually there are few places for them to open up. But what I found was that men will still open up more to their fellow men than I thought. I thought men would share with women, but actually it seems to be men are more comfortable with other men. And I think a very interesting example of that I've seen, a lot of it I've seen since the book was written effectively, is a friend of mine at football, and I reference it in the book, tried to commit suicide. And he's always the centre of the group and great fun and have a laugh. And, you know, it was a big shock to hear that he'd tried to do that. And we've talked a lot over the course of writing the book. But what I've noticed on the Twitter threads for the football team I support amongst the fans is what I'm looking for, an encouragement to vulnerability that I wouldn't expect in that environment. You know, growing up on the terraces, I've been going to football since I was 14. You know, that it's a very alpha male environment, a very mask wearing, you know, pee taking environment, where vulnerability doesn't normally go down very well. That has shifted. And you look at Twitter, which is quite a toxic environment at the best of times. But when it comes to this topic, people are more understanding of it and more accepting of it. I interview a former Charlton player. Charlton's my club. Better known for his spells at Norwich and Sheffield Wednesday, Leon McKenzie. And Leon tried to commit suicide when he was at Charlton. And, you know, stories like that we're hearing more and more and more. And that made me realise that, you know, I remember his time at Charlton, and he was going through an awful time, but we didn't know that. You know, he was missing his kids. He couldn't see his kids. He was living in a hotel room on his own. He was, at the end of his career, he'd struggled with injuries, and it was injuries that really depressed him. But of course, what happens is you just see a player performing badly for your team and you get on his back. That was before Twitter. Now, when I see football fans abusing players on Twitter and mentioning them, you know, atting them in so they see it, you know, I think you just don't know what these kids are going through, and what they've got to put up with. So there's a lot of, sorry, I'm veering off topic in terms of the gender thing, but it all wraps up together.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think that environment is shifting to a degree, and there's more understanding there, which is making it easier for men to share. On the flip side, women will share with other women to a large degree, but you take a corporate environment, you know, a male-dominated corporate environment, there's huge pressure on women to not be vulnerable, to show strength. And you have to really create the environment for them, a safe space for them to be vulnerable. And maybe the people that I talk to who are very advanced in their career and very successful have that environment, but I'm sure a lot of women don't and would struggle to be vulnerable, whereas a man might find it easier because there's less pressure on them to show that strength.
What makes a safe space for vulnerability then?
A trusted network. People you trust. People who you can be confident won't go, you know, leave the conversation and share it with everyone else. And also people who won't judge you. You know, I think one of the key things for me is the power of listening. And you want people that will give you good listening to. One of the things that's come out for me from this book, and one of my my weakness is I'm quick to try and solve things, and people keep pointing this out to me, so I'm trying to learn. If you say you've got a problem, I'm trying to help you find a solution before you've even finished your sentence. And actually, you need people who just let you finish the sentence and ask for whatever help you need. And sometimes the only help you need is someone to listen, and you're not looking for a solution there and then. I'm reading a very interesting book at the moment. I think it's Diane Klein. I can check, but it's all about listening to people to help them think better. And one of the passages that I read yesterday that really goes to this point was about not interrupting. And even if you've got information that the person speaking lacks, that would change their mindset of what they're sharing. So they'll come in and share a problem, and it's already solved. You still let them finish, and before you share it with them, because it's important for them to get through that without interruption. And I think when people are sharing a problem or a challenge that they have, it's as much about getting it off their chest and then finding out the space they're in and whether they're looking for solutions or anything else.
What about for people who feel when they offload, they're creating a burden on someone else, or they don't want to burden someone with their problems?
Yeah, I always say there's 3 reasons why we don't ask other people to help us,
Okay.
and that's number 1. We don't want to be a burden to other people. My response to that is always the same. I ask when I'm talking to groups, I will ask for a show of hands how many people had helped someone that they like in the last few months, and most people's hands will go up. And then I will ask them to keep their hands up, and I'll go around the room and I'll say, how did it make you feel? And the answers I always get are great, fantastic, valuable. It's all positives. And then I point out the disconnect. We don't ask people for help because we don't want to be a burden on them. But yet, when people ask us for help and we're able to, we get pleasure from it. So by not asking, we're denying people pleasure. To make that all fit together, you need to ask at the right time. In other words, you don't go up to a complete stranger and say, I want to give you pleasure. Can you help me? It's someone that, yeah. And I'm not saying never ask someone you don't know for help. There are arguments for or against, and actually that goes back to another surprise, which maybe we'll come to. But I am saying that very often the people that want to help you are the people that know, like, and trust you. So part of it is that timing, and part of it is what you ask for. Your job is to make it as easy as possible for someone to help you. Where a lot of people go wrong, a good example of this is people want help finding a new job. And they will ask by saying, do you know anyone who might employ me, or anyone who's looking for someone? That puts all the burden of looking and thinking on the person you're asking. That's not making it easy for them. If you turn around and say, I'm looking for a job, I know you know people at Coca-Cola, and I would love to work in their facilities management department. Could you introduce me? You've made it really easy for them. You've painted a picture in their mind of someone they know. If they like you and trust you and understand what that conversation would look like, then it's a pleasure to help you. So you're only being a burden if you are someone who doesn't want to help you, or you make it really hard for them to do so.
And what are the other 2 reasons?
I knew you would ask that. The other 2 are we're worried about looking weak and vulnerable. And I would argue that depends how you position it. So first of all, if you have picked the right people who don't judge you, as I said earlier, then that's not an issue. And you've got that trusted network, that trusted circle. And the second is it's how you position it. If you turn around and say, I'm really failing at my job, everything I do is going wrong, and no one likes me there, can you help me find another job? You look pretty weak and vulnerable. If you say, I've done really well at this job, but I feel that I'm ready for my next step, and I've almost outgrown it, and I want a bigger challenge, could you help me find one? I don't think that sounds weak and vulnerable at all. So it's how you position it. And then the third is we assume people won't or aren't able to help us. you know the old cliche about assumption, and I won't sort of go back over that, but you don't need to assume. Let other people think for themselves. But the other thing about that is make it okay for people to say no, and understand that there are many reasons why people might say no. And if you're asking the right people at the right time, then you should be at the bottom of that list. It's not about you. So get over yourself, grow a slightly thicker skin, and let people know that it's okay to say no.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And the other thing I was saying, just going back, because I said that there was another surprise that came in the writing of the book, and that was, I thought, one of the people I interviewed, and it's actually the bit I'd read up to yesterday with the proof, was my translator in Siberia. She's a very, very bright woman, and you know, so much insight from her. And she said that, you know, she was talking about the Russian approach to sharing and vulnerability. And she said that in Russia, they have these really long 4 or 5 day train journeys. And you sit with someone on these journeys and you tell them your whole life story. And people feel really comfortable doing that, probably because they'll never see them again. And that sort of was a fit with what I assumed, which was sharing with strangers would be one of the key ways where people felt comfortable. And there were elements of that came through. But when I asked people, would you be comfortable sharing with strangers, almost to a person, they said no.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't bear through with some of the stories, but people's feeling was, no, I don't want to share with a stranger. I only want to share with people close to me. I think my assumption before writing the book was that sharing with a stranger had a lot of benefits. And actually, I've got a chapter where I talked to psychologists and therapists about, you know, what sits behind a lot of this. And, you know, they talked about the power of talking to a stranger in therapy and the importance of that. And yet when I asked them,
Yeah.
would you share with a stranger? I think one of them was like, absolutely not.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of power in sharing with someone objective who has no real attachment. I think there's a lot of power in that, because there's probably less of that feeling of burdening as well, because there's no personal connection in there.
Yeah, completely. And I think that can also come through in mentoring. I think you can be too close to a mentor.
Yeah. That's why we always call it a professional friend. You got to, as a coach, you got to keep that professional boundary at all times.
Yeah, completely.
With the so at the beginning of this chat, you know, I opened it with, you know, how are you, and then would you tell me if you weren't? And you said it's only for those you trust. Now, based on everything we've kind of spoken about, I feel like it's not necessarily that, right? There's quite a few factors involved, and do you want to elaborate on that? Like at the time, probably caught me off guard a bit, but
yeah, I didn't realize we started recording.
I just like to pick a nice space, and I just thought, you know what, that's probably a good place to pick it up anyway, even if it doesn't go into the podcast.
That's fine. Although really embarrassingly, my door, I knew this would happen one day, my door has just gone with delivery. Can we pause 1 second? Sorry about that.
So I started this podcast asking you how you are, and, you know, in two sort of minds, you know, obviously to actually ask you how you are, but also to see your response, because I was curious, because you've spoken about this multiple times, is, you know, everyone has a default response, and one of the things you said was around trust, and that the reason why you wouldn't say, you know, having literally just met me for the first time face to face, is because of a trust thing. But having spoken through the different stories, some of the things you've said is that might not always be the case, given the power of having an objective professional mate or a coach or anything like that, where it's slightly less detached, it's slightly more detached. Tell us about that a bit more. Like what is the guard there, and what is...
I think it's actually a respect for people. When you meet a stranger for the first time and they say, how are you? It's understanding that the relationship isn't there to give them an honest answer. They haven't asked for that. It's an icebreaker, and recognize it for what it is. I mean, what I'm really encouraging people to do is know when to answer that honestly with people they've got a good relationship with. And actually, a good relationship doesn't have to be a long-standing one. There can be a connection with someone you've known, you know, for a short period of time, but it feels comfortable and it feels appropriate, and you'd be comfortable opening up to them. In the book, I talk about 2 types of people that ask, how are you? those who care about the answer and those who don't. And the way you find out is with teasers. So you don't, whoever it is, however well you know them, when someone says, how are you? You don't say, well, actually, things are really bad at the moment. You know, this has happened and that's happened. And da, 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 da. You throw out a line and you say, I'm okay. It's been a tough couple of months. Mm. And then they will say, I'm sorry to hear that. Anyway, that's the person who doesn't care about the answer. That's fine. If they turn around and say, oh, well, what's happened? You can then say, well, you know, I don't want to burden you or whatever it might be, or you can just go into it depending on the situation, but let them bring it out of you. You know, so that way they're invested in it and, you know, they're comfortable with the conversation. What you're looking to do is not get to a position where someone regrets asking you the question. So the initial answers should be fairly short, so that they, not monosyllabic, but fairly short, so that they've got the opportunity to, if you imagine it as a road, they can go as far down that road as they like, or just take a turn off to a different route if they want to. And you know, you get to a point where it's comfortable opening up a little bit more. But, you know, after that event in Reading, where I had the recognition that I hadn't been asking my network, I was a member of a private members club in London, and I was there one day a week or so after, and I bumped into another member of the Professional Speaking Association who I know well and like, and he said, how are you? And I said, well, actually, it's been pretty tough. And he said, I'm sorry to hear that, Andy. How can I help? I got 2 referrals from him in the next couple of weeks. I'd never got a referral from him before, because he always saw me as strong and successful and didn't think of helping me. But, and again, that wasn't a long conversation. We sat down and we talked about it. I told him where I was, but my answer was, actually, things have been pretty tough lately. Again, that gives him an out. He can go a different direction or he can dig deeper. It's his choice. So I think, yeah, when, you know, we've spoken once or twice before. It's a couple of months ago. When you say, how are you? And if I suddenly burden you with what's been going on in my life, you might be thinking, oh, well, I wasn't quite ready for that. So it's appropriate just to say, yeah, I'm good. And that's instinctive. As the relationship gets deeper, then that can open up if the rapport is right and the connection is right for it.
Yeah, the trust in a safe space is really the key here, isn't it? It's that safe space and having trust in it. If people have gone.
So I was going to say, it's an element of safe space. So from my perspective, as the person sharing, then there's, do I trust this person? Do I value their judgment? Do they have the right background to help me? Because one of the things I talk about in the book is your purpose for sharing and who do you share with. So you can actually be quite strategic and thoughtful about it. It's not just a blanket, tell everyone your life's a mess or you're struggling with something. But from your perspective, I have to consider, what's your purpose for asking? So there is a respect element there as well.
Yeah. Very interesting. So how are you, Andy?
I'm, like most people, I would say I'm mixed. I lost my father a few weeks ago. And that combined with the current circumstances with COVID means that I'm not going to be absolutely top of my game. But professionally, my business is as good as it's been for 2 or 3 years, I would say. You know, the 2 books out this year, the podcast which we launched, which is going really well, work's coming in. You know, we had a tough first 3 or 4 months with COVID, with clients finding their feet and working out what they were doing. But we've got a lot of work coming in at the moment, which is fantastic. So professionally, I'm very good. Personally, I'm coping with it, and I have my network around me that's supporting me, and that's the most important thing.
Sorry to hear about your father. First thing I was going to ask you was, like, who is your support network, and how do you lean on them personally?
I have a mixture of support networks. So I have a lot of friends. So there's a big informal support network. I don't believe wholly in completely separate professional and personal networks. I think for me, it's definitely a very strongly overlapping Venn diagram. and there's a lot of people in the middle coming from both sides. So I've got a lot of friends. I've been in business for over 20 years and networking for over 20 years. So I've got a very strong network of people who are there for me. I mean, after my father passed, the number of people that have said, if you want to talk, and meant it, and that ranges from people I've known for years and I'm really close to people I've met a handful of times, but I get on well with. I'd be on the phone for the next year if I was to take everyone up on the offer, and that's been phenomenal. So there's a lot of informal support in that sense, and I will often know in my gut who I want to turn to for certain things. I then have a mentor, a formal mentor. We paused the mentoring for a while because I've had so many other things going on, and with COVID, I asked him to mentor me for a particular reason, and that direction changed a bit with COVID. But I'm thinking about picking that up again. And I have 2 mastermind groups, so one of fellow speakers and one of people in my client's industry, client position, client industry. And then I also have a business acceleration program that is how I met you, through people on that program and support through that. So I have, and then there's my family, and actually one thing that's really been borne out over the last couple of months since my father became very ill and went to hospital is how close we really are. And there's been a lot of support through that, through the family as well. So yeah, I'm very blessed. I know not everyone's in that position, and I know the nature of what I do means I have a very powerful support network. But yeah, I'm blessed. There's a lot of people around me.
When you're thriving professionally but struggling, or you said you have some struggles personally.
Yeah.
How do you marry the two, and how do you show up professionally strong, or do you bring the vulnerability into your professional as well?
I always try and show up strong. As a speaker and trainer over the years, I used to run business breakfast meetings, and I'm not a morning person. So I would be up at 4:30 or 5, drive an hour and a half, struggling to keep my eyes open, have 20 minutes in the car with my eyes closed when I got to the venue, feel absolutely exhausted, walk in, and no one would know.
Yeah.
And I could run a training session, chair a meeting, whatever it could be. I delivered a 2-hour session virtually less than 12 hours after my father died. And I did tell my client before, in case, and we had backup plans. They did offer me the chance to postpone, but for various reasons, I didn't feel it appropriate. But we had it set up so if there were any issues, they could take over. And actually, bizarrely, the topic of someone passing away came up twice, which I wouldn't normally do in my sessions. And I managed to ride those, and no one would have known. I'm pretty sure no one would have known on those sessions. In fact, they told me. So I think adrenaline gets me through very often, and just focus. But so the vulnerability doesn't come into my professional life in that sense. However, I'm a very natural person. I tend to, I'm not very good at trying to pretend to be someone I'm not, even though I did act as a kid and auditioned for the RSC, but I'm not an actor in this sense. So, for example, sharing with you, about my dad passing away and about training, running a session the next morning, that's something that I know a lot of people wouldn't do. But for me, it's an authentic answer to the question, and that's my nature. So my vulnerability will always come through in that sense. I will share with my mentees or my audience or whoever it might be what will make it most relevant, most engaging, and most helpful to them. And people do resonate with your personal experiences. They want to know what you've been through. They want to know that you're human as well. And I don't do it in a calculated way. Often it will, I know the story of presenting at 12 hours after my father passed is something that's powerful and brings home a message, and it's something that will probably play a role in what I share going forward. I've shared it a couple of times, and I never planned to share it this early while it's still this raw. But if it's relevant, I'm not the sort of person that can sort of pass by it in my head. So I think I bring my vulnerability naturally in that sense by bringing my full self to anything that I'm involved with.
Yeah. How do you cultivate this authenticity in your relationships?
Well, the whole point of authenticity is that it's you, it's the natural you.
Yeah.
So it's not something to cultivate in my mind.
Well, probably the better
Yeah.
word is express it rather than
But any
cultivate.
of that, to
Yeah.
me, it's not. I know people who have a very strict.
Because you get the whole fake it till I make it people, you get the
Yeah,
masks
yeah,
people wear,
yeah.
you get what I'm saying here, right?
I totally get that. There are also, yes, so there are people, I mean, more for me, more pertinent to me is I know there are people who will say, that's my personal life,
Mm,
and that gets blocked off, and I
mm,
don't share that with anyone. And in my professional capacity, I'm professional, and that's who they get. And I respect that. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. This is who I am, and
mm.
it serves what I teach and how I approach things. But I don't cultivate it. I just have made a conscious decision to be okay with it. The fake it till you make it, I think that, to be honest, I don't have a problem with that. There are dangers of being inauthentic, and you have to be very careful about that, because if you're inauthentic with people, they see through you.
Yeah.
But equally, if you get to a point where you've got huge imposter syndrome, or you're in startup mode and you're looking to work with big companies, you have to express a confidence. You have to find a confidence, and there is an element of saying, yes, I can do this, and finding a way through it. So I think that there is an element of fake it till you make it. I don't particularly like the phrase,
Yeah.
because I think that does suggest dishonesty.
Well, I think the latter
Uh,
isn't the
yeah,
same context. The latter
no,
is just showing
yeah,
confidence in a different
yeah,
environment that you need
yeah,
to bring.
yeah.
Whereas the former
That's it.
is inauthentic and
That's
almost
that's it.
malice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A good metaphor would be, or good example of it would be professional speaking.
Mm,
So most people suffer from a fear of speaking in public, including professional speakers. You know, when I've spoken to audiences in four figures and some of the biggest theatres in the world, and um, you don't want to know how I'm feeling before I go on stage. Um, and I have a huge dialogue going through my head, particularly before bigger gigs. You're a fraud. Why do they want to hear you? I can't believe they're paying you this much. You know, all these different things. Plus, I have a physiological reaction. So professional speakers get nerves as well. The more you do something, the less nervous you become. So fake it till you make it, in a sense, in the positive sense,
yeah.
is part of the way forward there.
Mm,
Get up and do it. Just get up and do it, and get some what I call air miles under your belt. You know, if I think back to how I was as a speaker in my first year or two, I would dread to, I'm glad there's no video of it. And I always say, whatever you think of me now, I'm 100 or 1,000 times better than I was then. Whatever you judge me as a speaker, whether you love me or loathe me, I'm 1,000 times better than I was then. You have to get the air miles. So you do have to fake it till you make it in that sense. So that would be a good example for me of where it has a positive dimension to it. But as you suggest, there's a negative one as well. And that's where people are effectively being dishonest.
mm. I've seen some of your speeches online, and you would never tell that you're feeling like that
Yeah.
before. So credit to you.
Thank
And
you.
there's people that do fear present public speaking. I mean, everyone fears it, right?
Yeah.
While I've done some speaking, I still get those crazy nerves before. You're sweating, all
Yeah.
sorts, right? And so, what tips do you give to people who want to make that experience more enjoyable and feel like they can deliver a better message and have that confidence to step on stage?
Yeah. First is to remember you're not alone. It's something I talk about in Just Ask. That if we know we're not alone with a fear
Mm,
or a challenge, then that makes it easier for us. It doesn't make it go away, but it makes it easier for us to work through and live with. So understand that most people have that fear, and that's why I share that I have that fear, because as you say, so many people have said you wouldn't be able to tell. And I say exactly, and if you stand up there, the more you do it, the less people will be able to tell. I can tell when someone's nervous, but I think I do this for a living.
Yeah.
Most people wouldn't. The best advice I ever had came from the co-author of my second book, Peter Roper. And Peter told me, I remember back in the early days of me speaking, I had a talk at Earl's Court at the conference hall. And the speaker before me, it was in one of these breakout rooms at the conference, and the speaker before me was a TV celebrity. The room was absolutely packed, and he overran. And so he finished. I had to go up there, and I had a few props that I used in my talk. So, whereas if you speak on a main stage somewhere, you've done everything in the background, and no one sees you until you're introduced. And you walk on to applause, and then you go in, hopefully, and then you go into your opening line. Here, I walk in from the back with everyone sitting there watching me, get with my carrier bags, with my props, get them out, stand up, look out to a sea of 120 faces, including my dad. And a few people I knew, all expectantly waiting. And I just dried up. I didn't know what to say. And I shared that with Peter, and he said, always know your opening lines. And to me, having a powerful, punchy opening that you know by heart, you don't have to know your whole talk by heart, but know that opening and know how you're going to deliver it. That whatever my nerves, once I've got past my opening, I'm fine. And it's about having that. And I have got a bit cocky in my old age and experience. And I have changed my opening in the moment based on what's happened on the day and what previous speakers have said. I would say on occasion it's worked brilliantly, but more often than not, it's flopped. And it's knocked me sideways because I didn't know what I was going to say, and I didn't know where I was going from there. So it's sort of not giving me the momentum that I need for the presentation. So know it and stick to it.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about when I do podcasts, and I'm very similar in that I just need to nail the first interaction. Yeah. And as long as I know that bit, the rest will just flow and it will just become a conversation.
That's it.
Yeah. Interesting. With your writing of the book, Just Ask, you said you've become an expert in this just by default of writing and researching. And what are some of the key takeaways you think people will get from reading the book when it comes out?
I think the number one takeaway I want people to have is the confidence to go and share something that's on their mind. Now, wherever they get that from, that could be throughout the whole book. There's strategies in there as well, but the number one thing I want to take away is that it's okay to share. And not only is it okay, vulnerability is a strength. And if you're going to progress in your career, if you're going to do your job more effectively, if you're going to have strong personal mental health, then find strength through vulnerability. That would be the number one thing for me by a long way. When you sort of dig a bit deeper, the sort of takeaways that you're looking for is understanding what holds you back. So understanding that when you're not sharing because you want to look good, or when you're not sharing because you want to be seen as strong, thinking about where to share. How do you approach social media, for example? We've talked a lot about who do you share with in this conversation, but what about using social media? I touched on it earlier when I talked about my friend's experience, but understanding that, and also what are you looking for in terms of the outcome of the conversation with somebody else. So those would be some of the key takeaways that would certainly I would look to stand out. The final chapter is the 10 rules of asking, and just simple things that people can do in order to be comfortable sharing and confident sharing and getting what they need from doing so. But I think in terms of primary takeaways, it is just as simple as having read this, I now know. And we talked a lot about, I've mentioned people who have attempted suicide and some pretty major issues. It can actually just be as simple as a client has asked me to do something for them and I don't know how to approach it. Or I've got a project I'm working on and I'm really challenged with it, or I don't know what my next job should be. It doesn't have to be life-threatening, impactful challenges. It's day-to-day stuff. I don't know. Well, then someone else might do.
And those little things are what allows the big things to be shared in that same space. Because if there's trust shown with the little things, the bigger things become easier to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. You're building trust, and you're also building muscle memory. You're making yourself naturally more confident opening up and asking for help. It's exactly the same as speaking in public. The more you speak, the more comfortable it becomes. Not always wholly comfortable necessarily, but more comfortable, or you know what to expect and how to deal with it. And it will be the same with asking for help. Once you've started getting used to it, then you'll find yourself doing it a lot more often.
With point 3, you said knowing what you want to get out of it. I'm assuming that's based on having that awareness that you need to speak to someone or need to let go of something and actually just ask first.
Yeah. And it goes back, it's taking the opposite seat from what I said earlier, because, I was talking about when someone was sharing with you, they don't necessarily want a solution. And if that's you sharing, then understand what you want. So if I'm talking to you, do I just want you to listen? Do I just need to get this off my chest? Or do I want your support? If I want your support, what am I looking for? Can I ask you a specific question for specific help? The more specific I am, the easier it becomes for you to help me. So understand your purpose in sharing and how you expect it to move you forward.
What are your thoughts on the social media sharing?
I think it's a personal choice. From my interview with Claire in the book, I understand better why some people are very open on social media. I'm very open about it in the book. My social media will veer towards the positive, and I don't tend to share much of the negative going on in my life, but when it's appropriate, I do. But I also feel that my social media is fairly authentic to where I am. Maybe veering on sharing the positive experiences, but I'm not. It's not everything is wonderful type profile. But I think that there is a danger in social perfectionism, and this came out a lot in my interview with my niece. That her generation, but I think it's spread beyond. Everything has to be perfect, so they'll take 5,000 selfies to get the right one, and apparently there's Finstagram now, Finsta accounts where they're private accounts just with their friends where they show the real images without the filters and so on. But I know I've got daughters of friends of that age, for example, who, well, what I'm thinking one person in particular who's in her mid-20s, who I kept sort of saying, put a natural shot up, because everything had Snapchat filters on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, show the real you. So my take on it is it's personal, but don't be frightened to show a little bit of your true self. You don't, if it's not you, you don't have to share everything that's wrong in your life. And actually, I don't get comfortable reading those on an account. But having spoken to Claire, if that serves you and it works for you, then that's fine. As Claire said, people have a choice of whether they read it or not and follow it or not. But think that through. But try and be authentic to a degree.
Finally, on people who really struggle with trust and struggle with having anyone around them, what are your thoughts to them? Because that's the people who find this whole topic the hardest, and they'll take on everything you said, but they'll still be like, I don't really have anyone around me. I don't trust anyone. I've been screwed over in the past.
Yeah.
How does that begin to mend again? And
I think small steps, first of all. You're not going to turn to someone who has damaged trust and say, no, you've got to share everything with someone or everything with everyone. Pick one or two people and share small stuff that's not, ask some small questions that's not going to damage you if it went wrong. Build up your trust step by step. until you get comfortable with that, and then you can sort of build that trust in individuals. I think that we talk about not trusting people. I think there's a difference between not trusting and distrusting. And not trusting implies to me trust neutral. We use it in common English to mean distrust, but I think we can use it to mean it's trust neutral. I don't distrust you, but I have no reason to trust you yet. So I'm someone who starts from, I tend to be quite, some people would say gullible, I say generous, and I tend to give people credit. Yeah. Others will say, well, you've got to prove yourself to me. And you're talking probably about the latter. So if people are starting at trust neutral with you at 0, what does it take to get yourself to a 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10 in trusting them? When you're there, how do you get to a 3 to a 4? So you're going to take a lot longer to open up to someone than I am. And that's fine. But as long as you're consciously taking steps towards it, I'm going to do this stuff naturally. But obviously, as we've covered, not to the extent that I could do. But if you're verging on distrustful, but you're certainly towards trust neutral, you're going to have to force yourself. And maybe it means something that we touched on, mentors. Maybe it means working with someone as a mentor and opening up to them, so that there's almost a transactional arrangement around it. My thoughts go to the confessional in church and the anonymity of that experience. Pick up the phone it really depends on what the situation is. But I think of picking up the phone to Samaritans, for example. We're giving a portion of profits from the book to My Black Dog, which is a charity where you can talk to someone who's been through similar issues in the past. That's a mental health charity. So Samaritans, My Black Dog, similar organisations like that where anonymity is guaranteed. And just see how it feels. Now, obviously, you're not going to do that if it's, I don't know how to deal with this project at work. But if it's a bigger issue or a more personal issue, it doesn't have to be a huge issue.
Yeah.
But just if it's a more personal one, pick up the phone.
Yeah, we've heard that from a lot of our clients who say sometimes just typing out an email to us and just pressing send is all they want, because then that way they've written it and they know someone's seen it. Yeah. And what's said back is really quite relevant. It's just the fact that they've unloaded.
Yeah. And even the step before, just write the email.
Yeah.
Don't send it, just write it, just get it out, express it. It's about expressing it. And I talked a couple of times about venting. That's a form of venting, getting it off your chest.
So Andy, where can people get the book?
All good bookshops and some rubbish ones as well, I think.
It's in stores as well, yeah?
Yeah, well, you can. I don't know about stocking yet. That will remain to be seen. But you can go in and order it. It's already available for pre-order on Amazon. It will be available on Smiths and Waterstones and all the other online bookstores. And yeah, you can walk into your local bookstore. If they're not stocking it, then it will be available. They can order it. It's due to be published on December the 10th. But as I say, it's available on Amazon for pre-order now, so I'm assuming that it will be available more widely. Just tell the bookstore.
Brilliant, thank you, and highly recommend everyone read it. I'm looking forward to getting my own copy.
Brilliant, thank you.